Contact. Phoenix Journal Review. News reviews, previews and alternative views. Not to oppose error is to approve it. Not to defend truth is to suppress it. Volume 47, Number 12 News Review $3 August 9, 2006. Independent confirmation of the Philippines gold. Happy New Year and belated happy birthday. A good way to start this new year is wishing from the depths of our hearts and minds a happy birthday to Emmanuel aka Jesus, born August 8, 8 BC. This will be the 20th year of our new cycle starting August 17, 2006. In the Mayan calendar system, the 20th glyph is known as sun. Take note of the sun graphic in the background of this issue's pages. For the ground crew and light workers, the sun with its light-giving rays represents the Aten. The 8 pointed rays of the sun symbol used in this issue represent the 8 provinces which expelled the Spanish from the Philippines. In this issue, Commander Hatonn fills in with some history of banking and missing pieces in the puzzle of the Marcos gold. In our lead piece, Ron Kurtinger presents independent confirmation of the Philippines gold and how this new information affects the Taleno Foundation and Global Alliance Investment Association. In addition, E.J. Ecker presents Global Alliance, Steps and Sequence, showing how the Global Alliance program could be implemented in a matter of days. Of course, all of these writings relate to the continuing story of God's divine plan. Enjoy the reading and share with loved ones. Quoting. July 30th, 06, 19 to 348. Sunday, July 30th, 2006, year 19, day 348, Manila, Philippines. 2 million tons of gold. One thing that raises eyebrows as people examine the information regarding the Taleno Foundation is the mention of hundreds of thousands of tons of gold. There are only 30-something thousand tons in all of the central banks in the world. In this piece we will present the case for there being almost 2 million metric tons of gold in the Philippines, but first we will provide some background regarding the corroborating information. The Taleno Foundation's ongoing efforts to preserve and administer the estate, for the benefit of the Filipino people, have coincidentally resulted in independent confirmation of the vast quantity of gold in the Philippines, including a plausible story regarding the origin of that gold. It is a story which should be of immense interest to all Filipinos and of more than passing interest to all who are interested in the Global Alliance Investment Association program, which in a legal sense is every individual on the planet, because the GAIA program exists for the benefit of all people, globally. The small coastal town of Infanta, population 5,259, was ravaged on December 3, 2004 when mudflows caused by overlogging combined with torrential rains to bury much of the town in knee-deep mud. At the time, as some readers may recall, Doris Ecker expressed how proud she was of the efforts of the American Marines from Okinawa who flew in to provide emergency relief. If only that was the face of the U.S. military globally. The people live mostly at the coastline and earn their livelihood primarily from fishing, although these days they must go farther offshore due to dynamite fishing by a few miscreants, which has eliminated the fish that used to be caught just offshore. What could any of this possibly have to do with hundreds of thousands of tons of gold? Bear with us while we provide just a little more background. Throughout the Philippines, the wealth of the Roman Catholic religion is evident, marked by some of the grandest church buildings set amid poverty-stricken surroundings. Even the church in Infanta, given the meager population, is relatively inspiring. In its shadow, figuratively speaking, is the far less dominating building belonging to the Apostolic and Catholic Church of the East and its school, which serves the needs of some 80 students. At a recent meeting of the Taleno Foundation, the foundation's attorney brought with him a special guest, the Archbishop of the Apostolic and Catholic Church of the East, presiding over an area which encompasses the town of Infanta, Mar Levi Bartoma. The attorney had already taken on a legal case involving the Archbishop on a pro bono basis, in an effort to prevent the small church from being unceremoniously evicted from the property it has leased for many years. As it turns out, the landlord is the holder of a spurious land title which should never have been issued. The land should properly be administered by the foundation. The Archbishop was very pleased to hear this news. Coincidentally, as God arranges things, Archbishop Mar Levi Bartoma happens to have written a book, God Today Exhorts, Come Out of Her, My People. The book deals primarily with the historical relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the Apostolic and Catholic Church of the East, exhorting, as the title implies, abandonment of the hypocrisy of the Roman Catholic Church, but along the way happens to provide independent confirmation of the existence of enormous quantities of gold here in the Philippines. Coincidentally, all of this transpired just ahead of 20 de Julio, July 20th, which is the Liberation Day of the people and town of Infanta from the Spanish regime during the K.O.R.A.N Revolution, which started in August 1896. With that background, we will now take a look at some interesting excerpts from the Archbishop's book. Please note that this book had a small initial print run and is out of print at this time. The Archbishop is looking for financial wherewithal for a second printing. Contact information is provided as cell 0916-7435509 or email fryatzachmonsanto@yahoo.com. Pay attention, please, because we're jumping right into the point in the story where the origin of hundreds of thousands of metric tons of gold is first mentioned. Quoting pp 103 to 104, all emphasis is in the original text. Philippine colonization by Spain. In 1478, Muslims from the Malayan Peninsula crossed the Malacca Strait and conquered Java, the capital of the Majapahit Empire. Subsequently, the Malay/Srivijaya/Majapahit disintegrated. In its place, a Muslim religious government was established, inaugurating the reign of the sultanates. A family of Maharajas and Rajas, Tajin, was then ruling the Majapahit Empire. They retreated and consolidated their position in a group of 7,169 islands, known as Maharlika, now Philippines, away from the oncoming Muslims. Being a descendant of royal Malayan blood, the Tajin family had its share of power, authority, and riches from the collected taxes during its 900-year rule in the empire, and even 2 millennia earlier when there was commerce with King Solomon of Israel. RK. There is no mention here of the important role of the British East India Company, which was heavily involved with the flourishing spice trade in the region, not to mention the opium trade with China, but you can be fairly sure that this ancient drug money also figures into the story and could account for a large portion of the amassed gold. All naval traffic, then as now, pretty much had to pass through the Malacca Strait or take a very long detour. The Maharaja and his sons, the Rajas, ruled the Maharlika using their own laws, the Code of Kalanshia. The Maharlika was a very rich and flourishing country. By the early 16th century, the ruling Maharaja, Luzang Tajin, had 720,000 metric tons of gold that he kept in present-day Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, or North Borneo. RK, that's a whole lot of spices. At that time, Sabah was part of the Maharlika. The family tree of Maharaja Luzang Tajin, Maharaja Luzang Tajin. He resided in the Lamayan district, now known as Malacanang. He was married to Margaret Acuna MacLeod. RK, one very interesting point not made here is that King Luzang Tajin apparently lived to the ripe old age of 270. It seems our Almighty Father gave him quite a lengthy assignment. As a note of correction, in an article written by Senan Marcos on this subject, King Tajin's wife was erroneously identified as Lamayan Boan, who was instead the wife of Prince Lakan Acuna MacLeod, one of the great king's grandsons identified below. Careful reading of the Aganya decision with compromise agreement from 1972 indicates that King Luzang Tajin's wife was in fact Margaret Acuna MacLeod as indicated here. His sons were Raja Lapu-Lapu Tajin. He ruled Mactan. Raja Solomon Tajin. He ruled Manila and its suburbs, i.e., Rizal, Cavite, Batangas, Laguna, and the Carolina province, now Quezon. He married Princess Dayang Dayang Kiram. Later he married Mary Ann Dent. Mary's father, Alfred Dent, was a British lord and London merchant. He was a co-owner of the Royal British North Borneo Company. Luzang Tajin's grandsons were Raja Lekandula Tajin. He ruled Tonda. Raja Gat Maban Tajin. He ruled eastern Quezon, Maban, Sampaloc, and Lucban. He was married to the daughter of the 6th Sultan of Brunei, Abdul Kahar. Raja Bajinda Tajin. He ruled Boal. Raja Kabangsaran Tajin. He ruled southern Mindanao. Raja Colombo Tajin. He ruled Limasawa. Raja Humaban Tajin. He ruled Cebu. Raja Sikatuna Tajin. He ruled a part of Boal. Prince Lakan Acuna MacLeod Tajin. Son of Raja Solomon, he was adopted by his grandmother, Margaret MacLeod Tajin. Born during the Spanish colonial rule on December 17, 1686, he changed his surname to Taleno so he could easily pursue his revolutionary activities against the colonizers. In 1726, at the age of 40, he married Princess Elizabeth Overbeck MacLeod of Austria. In 1761, he sought the help of the British against the Spaniards. Later he married Lame Bowen. He lived for 178 years. R.K. Prince Lakan Acuna MacLeod Tajin Taleno lived from 1686 through 1864. Why did our Heavenly Father grant these Tajians such long lives except to ensure the future unfolding of his divine plan? He begot a son, Prince Julian MacLeod Tajin Taleno. He was married to Princess Amina K.O.R.A.N of the Sultanate of Sulu. He died in 1898. He begot a son, R.K. Actually, upon examination of the Agana Court's 1972 decision with compromise agreement, it looks like in 1898 Prince Julian MacLeod Tajin Taleno succeeded to win the support of the Grand Government of the United States of America, where the Treaty of Paris between Spain, United States, Great Britain, France, and Germany had been signed and enforced into law respecting private ownership of the inhabitants and the royal family of the archipelago. Later in the decision with compromise agreement we read, the prince died on the year 1939 at the age of 91 years old by reason of heart attack in Europe, after he transported the Tajin gold bullion of 617,500 metric tons to the Vatican City and had deposited it to the trust of the Holy See as escorted by Reverend Father Robert Hayes, who was in custody of the last will and testament involving OCT-01-4 of the archipelago and that precious wealth, whose heirs are Don Esteban Benitez Taleno and Benito Taleno. Confirming this assessment, still further along in the text of the decision with compromise agreement, we read, Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno, Tajin, who died on December 17, 1939. Thus, the following statement regarding Don Esteban Benitez Taleno appears to be incorrect. Don Esteban Benitez Taleno. He died in the Vatican in Rome in 1939. R.K. No. Don Esteban Benitez Taleno was apparently alive at the time of the Agana decision in 1972 and for at least a decade after. See note above. He begot a son, Don Benito Acuna Taleno. He died during the Japanese occupation of the Maharlika. He begot a son, Prince Julian Morden Taleno. He is presently alive. End quoting. At this point we must note that Judge Agana ordered the formation of an entity to be named Don Esteban Benitez Taleno and Don Gregorio Madrigal ACOP Foundation for the purpose of protecting and conserving the estate for the benefit of the Filipino people. Gregorio Madrigal ACOP was, we are told, the brother-in-law of Esteban Benitez Taleno, having married his sister. Both men passed away in the early 1980s and the various governments of the Philippines have apparently made every effort to take the property, real estate and gold, for their own purposes ever since Ferdinand Marcos was unlawfully removed from power in 1986. Thoroughly aided and abetted by the international banking cartel, all aspects of the Philippines' power structure, the government, the courts, the Roman Catholic Church and of course all of the leaders of these institutions have sought to deprive the Filipino people of this vast inheritance. This is not some conspiracy theory, it is an observable and now proven fact. It is now up to the Filipino people to become aware of the facts and reclaim that which is lawfully their birthright. The Taleno Foundation is in place, ready, willing and able to administer this vast wealth for the benefit of all Filipinos instead of a select few who have prospered at their expense. As we shall see in the following section, the notion of public lands which exist for the benefit of the government instead of the people is entirely erroneous. OCT-01-4 including the entire archipelago except for annotations against that original Torrens system deed and the gold is private property, which is to be administered for the benefit of the people. The government through its Solicitor General presented its position paper documenting the supremacy of OCT-01-4 to the Agana Court and was forced to compromise, claiming control over only those lands the government then occupied and only for so long as those lands continued to be used for the government. Let us now review the history of OCT-01-4, which is the basis of all private land ownership in the Philippines. Quoting, pp. 115-117. The British rule. In 1761 Prince Lakan Acuna MacLeod Taleno R.K., who lived from 1686 through 1864, son of Raja Solomon Tajin and grandson of Maharaja Luzong Tajin, sought the help of the English government in his struggle against the oppressive rule of the Spanish colonizers. He contacted Alexander Dalrymple, an employee of the British East Indian Company (RK). Please read Dr. John Coleman's Committee of 300 to understand the true nature of the British East India Company's business, which was based primarily on the opium trade based in North Borneo. Dalrymple first went to Sulu in January 1761 to consult with the reigning Sultan Bant Elan for an island he wanted to use for the British Company (RK) to store perishables such as tea and spices. It seems far more likely this base was connected to the illicit drug trade. He went to Zamboanga, back to Sulu and then to Manila in November to get the signature of Sultan Alimuddin, who was under the custody of the Spaniards. On January 2, 1762, the British declared war against Spain. On August 1, 1762, a British expedition to the Maharlika was launched from Madras, India. The British fleet under the commands of General Draper from the Army and Admiral Cornish from the Navy entered Manila Bay in September 13, 1762. The invasion of Manila caught the Spaniards completely by surprise. Draper sent summons to the defenders to surrender. The Spanish Council of War, presided by the Governor-General, Archbishop Manuel Rojo de Rio, resolved to fight to the end. The British attacked and routed the Spanish army. On October 6, 1762, the British Royal Army and Navy liberated the Filipinos from the Spanish colonizers. The abuse in land use and cruelty to the native Filipinos were the root of the discontent and rebellion of the Filipino people against the Spanish colonizers. After the formal surrender of the Spanish defenders in Manila, the British government headed by General Dawson Draper, ordered the cancellation of the deed of occupation of the Maharlika, as drafted by Father Andres Urdaneta on December 7, 1565, that declared the whole archipelago as the property of King Philip II of Spain. In replacement, Draper drew a document that recognized Raja Lakan MacLeod, Tajin, Taleno as the legitimate heir of the Maharlika, the grandson of Maharaja Luzong Tajin. The document was entitled Original Certificate of Title 01-4 Protocol. The number 01 refers to the One Nation, known in pre-Hispanic times as Maharlika. The number 4 refers to the original 4 regions of this nation: 1. Luzon, 2. Visayas, 3. Mindanao and 4. Palawan, Tajin, now Calayan, Islands and North Borneo. In 1963, when the Federation of Malaysia was created, the name was changed to Sabah. RK. This included the Spratly Islands just north of Palawan, the ownership of which is now contested by 6 other countries. The British recognized the fact that North Borneo, Sabah, was part of the Maharlika archipelago. The British document barred the claim of Spain that by reason of conquest and physical occupation, the Maharlika became the property of the King of Spain. The British OCT 01-4 Protocol recognized the claim of the Tajin royal family that they have lived and ruled these islands since time immemorial. Consequently, this document turned over the whole archipelago to its original owner, the Tajin royal family, as represented by a prince, Lakan Acuna Tajin. When the war between England and Spain ended on February 10, 1763, this document, OCT 01-4, was used as one of the conditions of the British government on the cession of the Maharlika to Spain. On January 7, 1764, the Spaniard, Simon de Anda, affirmed and reconfirmed the ownership of the land, Hacienda Filipina, as embodied in the British OCT 01-4 Protocol by issuing a new Spanish land title in the name of Prince Lakan Acuna Tajin Taleno. 100 years later, in 1864 RK, presumably upon the passing of Prince Lakan Acuna Tajin Taleno at the age of 178, OCT 01-4 was reissued to Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno through the Royal Audience Case RD 571. It ordered the Spanish encomienda to maintain its decision that the Maharlika archipelago belonged to Taleno and that the said title was bankable in accordance with the Spanish mortgage law. In 1891, the Spanish Royal Audiencia issued the Titulo de Propiedad de Terrenos of 1891, Royal Decree 01-4 Protocol, which copied and confirmed the OCT 01-4 Protocol as originally issued by the British government to Prince Lakan Acuna Tajin. This was later affirmed and confirmed by the Land Registration Act 496 in 1902. End quoting. At the beginning of the last century we see that there is no question of the existence of OCT-01-4, the original certificate of title for the entire Philippines archipelago, and that it belongs to the Tajin Taleno clan and in particular to one, Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno. In the next section we shall see what became of Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno, OCT-01-4 and its associated hundreds of thousands of tons of gold. Quoting, pp 184-185. The modern Vatican covets the Maharlika. In the early 1930s, Europe was in a depression and Germany was financially bankrupt. An unknown party leader promised the German people that he could create jobs and boost its economy. The Germans dared him and put him in power. His name is Adolf Hitler. In June 1933, the Vatican and Hitler, a Roman Catholic, signed a concordat for mutual protection and enhancement. Shortly after that, Hitler was loaded with money. He built a massive army and manufactured weapons for war. Then Hitler took Poland. Before 1918, there was no Poland. That land was part of Germany and used as a buffer zone to separate Germany from Russia. But when Hitler reclaimed it, England declared war on Germany. Throughout the Spanish occupation of the Maharlika, members of the Tajin/Taleno clan have been visiting Europe since some of their relatives were English and Austrian. From 1866 to 1898, Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno R.K., who became title holder of OCT-01-4 in 1864, had also been frequenting the Vatican. In 1934, under Pope Pius XII, the Vatican negotiated with a member of the Filipino royal family, the Christian Taleno clan in the Maharlika. An agreement was reached that 640,000 metric tons of the Taleno gold would be lent to the Pope. This was part of that gold accumulated by the Southeast Asian Srivijaya/Majapahit Empire during its glorious reign of 900 years. In 1939, two members of the Taleno family and a Roman Catholic priest, Father Jose Antonio Diaz, brought the gold from Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, to the Vatican. RK, this is slightly at odds with the facts as presented by Judge Aganya, who mentions only one member of the Tajin Taleno family, Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno, along with the Reverend Father Robert Hayes. Father Hayes could have been Father Jose Antonio Diaz, aka Santa Romana. This man used many aliases. And then, curiously, with the gold now safely stowed in the Vatican, the record shows that Prince Julian MacLeod Taleno suddenly died in Europe of a heart attack on December 17, 1939. Doing business with the money masters can have that effect on men, for some reason. After doing this, Father Diaz R.K. Hayes, Santa Romana, went back to the Maharlika and resided in Cabanatuan City. After World War II, he facilitated the safe return of the 640,000 metric tons of gold from the Vatican to the Maharlika. Manuel Acuna Roxas, a relative of the Acuna/Tajin/Taleno clan, then a congressman, and Bishop Enrique Sobrapina, Sr., in the presence of attorney Lorenzo Tanada, received the gold in Manila. RK, there is good reason to believe, even from further along in this account, that the young attorney Ferdinand E. Marcos was involved in the return of the gold. Certainly by all accounts we have seen it was Ferdinand Marcos and Diaz/Santa Romana who shared in the enormous 30% commission, that is 192,000 tons of gold worth around $4 trillion today. For handling this transaction. Who can say this wealth was ill-gotten? A lease agreement was made between the Taleno clan and the Maharlika government. A total of 617,500 metric tons of gold was deposited in the newly installed Central Bank of the Maharlika to comply with its requirement for gold reserve. Under the terms of the contract, the Central Bank became the holder of that gold. That lease agreement will expire in the year 2005. RK, the Taleno Foundation has given notice of the termination of this 50-year lease following the additional 5-year discretionary period on December 31, 2005, but remains unable to obtain an inventory of this asset even though the central bank, now Banco Central Pilipinas, is no longer entitled to hold the gold. Having gained the trust and confidence of Father Diaz, the Taleno clan made him the main negotiator and trustee of their gold. Father Diaz, in turn, hired the services of attorney Ferdinand E. Marcos, then a highly recommended brilliant young lawyer having attained notoriety when he successfully defended himself in the Nalandasan case in 1939. The Taleno clan paid commission to Father Diaz and attorney Marcos in gold, 30% from the principal of 640,000 metric tons. In 1949, the two richest men in the world were Father Jose Antonio Diaz and attorney Ferdinand E. Marcos. Between the two of them they legitimately earned and owned 192,000 metric tons of gold. Ferdinand Marcos withdrew their share of the gold from the central bank and minted it RPCB. Sometime later, Father Diaz and Marcos brought their gold to Switzerland, in the Swiss Bank Corporation in Zurich. The remaining 400,000 metric tons of Taleno gold is in the third-floor basement of the central bank minting plant in East Ave, Quezon City. There are 950,000 metric tons of gold, declared missing in the International Court of Justice, picked up by Yamashita from its European ally, Hitler. Another 250,000 tons of the Japanese loot around Southeast Asia are both now in the Maharlika. This country then became the holder of 1.6 million metric tons of gold bars. Some of the Yamashita gold buried in the Maharlika has been found. But the bulk of it is still buried to this day. And even now, thousands are secretly digging for it, including Japanese treasure hunters. The Wall Street Journal in its November 15, 1985 issue wrote that 2/3 of all the gold in the world is in the Maharlika. 1/3 is divided among the rest of the countries in the world. Very few Filipinos know this. End quoting. Let's review some numbers at this point because there are certainly some unexplained losses along the way. The Tajin Taleno gold started at 720,000 tons. 640,000 tons were transported to the Vatican and back, leaving 80,000 tons unaccounted from the outset. Out of the 640,000 tons, 192,000 tons were paid in commission, which should leave 448,000 tons, but somehow that number has become 400,000 tons, leaving another 48,000 tons unaccounted. Following this story there are 128,000, 80,000 plus 48,000 tons of gold which somehow slipped through the cracks, in addition to 192,000 tons earned in commissions, whereabouts unknown. Oops. Out of the remaining 400,000 tons we do not know how much remains. We know there was an effort to do a major disappearing act when the old central bank morphed into the new Banco Central Pilipinas, but a recent decision of the Supreme Court, Banco Filipino versus BSP, has upheld that BSP is responsible for the liabilities of the old central bank. So, how much longer can they keep these hundreds of thousands of tons of gold hidden under the carpet and out of sight of the Filipino people while 80% live at the edge of starvation? The point is that ultimately, a complete accounting should show where all of the original 720,000 tons went, not to mention the estimated 1.2 million tons of Yamashita treasure, combined German and Japanese plunder, identified above. That is very nearly 2 million tons of gold worth more than $38 trillion at today's price. The phony, CIA-backed EDSA, People Power, exhibition of 1986 had one primary purpose, and that was to take this vast quantity of gold from the Philippines and the Filipino people for the benefit of the international banking cartel to enslave mankind. What about the Santa Romana/Diaz/Hayes Vatican Commission shared with Ferdinand Marcos? Quoting, PG 186. When Father Jose Antonio Diaz, alias Severino Sta Romana, died in 1974, all that 30% commission in gold became the legendary Marcos gold. After providing for his family in Marcos's letter of instruction, the whole wealth derived from this was supposed to be given to the Filipino people. This was the Marcos wealth that some politicians and churchmen kept on saying was the ill-gotten Marcos wealth. RK. We'll see why this wealth has been labeled ill-gotten a little further along in our study that until today is in Marcos' secret accounts. On April 9, 1973, Marcos said, "My earthly goods have been placed in the custody and for the disposition of the Marcos Foundation dedicated to the welfare of the Filipino people." End quoting. The plans of Ferdinand Marcos are hinted at in the following citation. Quoting, PG 187. In his grand plan, Marcos wanted to re-establish the former grandeur of the Maharlika and the whole region of Southeast Asia, the former Malayan Empire. In June 1983, Marcos appeared before the first world leaders in Toronto. He announced his plan to boost the economy of the Southeast Asia region by creating the Asian dollar. This would be backed up by the 400,000 metric tons of gold in the central bank of the Maharlika and the other gold he scattered around the region. He would also add to this his own personal 192,000 metric tons in Switzerland. The Asian dollar, backed up by the 2/3 of all the gold in the world that was in the Maharlika, would have made the Maharlika money more valuable and stronger than the American dollar. This was his vision to raise Southeast Asia to be at par with the rest of the first world countries. End quoting. There is very good reason to believe that Mr. Marcos's plans were even more far-reaching than this suggests. There is plenty of solid evidence of a program Marcos worked on with American President Ronald Reagan, which is referred to as the ABL, Ang Bagong Lipunan, program. Under this program some 250 sets of gold, documentation, and related ABL currency were to be shipped to various countries around the world. A typical set included 3,500 metric tons of gold, worth some $70 billion at today's price. Does it start to make a little more sense as to why those UN inspectors were using metal detectors in the palaces of Iraq while they supposedly saw weapons of mass destruction? Or why Saddam Hussein was such a threat to the powers that be? Or how and why the price of gold has been depressed on world markets? Or why former gold bug Alan Greenspan would come out with a statement labeling gold a barbarous relic? Indeed. To understand why it was necessary to remove Ferdinand Marcos from office in 1986, it helps to know that the Yamashita treasure was considered booty. After the passage of 30 years without a valid claim against it, this booty would belong to its new possessor. That would have been in 1976, but the International Criminal Court, ICC, at that time extended the deadline by 10 years to 1986. The someones who had accumulated the German and Japanese plundered gold gathered in by Yamashita obviously preferred not to come forward with their claims, because such claims could have revealed the source of such wealth, which was, in all probability, quite probably derived from illicit activities. What became of the remaining 400,000 metric tons pertaining to the Tajin Taleno clan, and where is it today? Quoting, PG 191. To this day, the 400,000 metric tons of the Maharlika, Taleno, gold are still in the central bank in East Avenue, Quezon City. Nobody can move it because Marcos insured it with the Lloyds of London and its agents are guarding it. But the present government does not acknowledge its existence. End quoting. Not only have successive governments of the Philippines failed to acknowledge the existence of the gold, they have conspired to keep this information from being known to the Filipino people. We assume this is because they have been working at ways to convert the gold for their own selfish gain, probably in conspiracy with the international banking cartel. To this day, however, no one seems to have found a legal solution. Mr. Marcos was, after all, a brilliant attorney. Immediately after Ferdinand Marcos was removed from office literally by a U.S. military helicopter, the newly installed president, Corazon Aquino, formed the Presidential Commission on Good Government, PCGG, purportedly to go after the Marcos' ill-gotten wealth. It was very important to the conspirators that this wealth should be labeled ill-gotten, even though, as has already been shown, Mr. Marcos was in his own right the wealthiest man on the face of the earth and had absolutely no need to take anything from anyone. Quoting, PG 192. A decision of the Federal Supreme Court of Switzerland dated December 21, 1990 said, by decision of May 29, 1986, the Attorney General of the District of Zurich accepted in principle the legal assistance requested by the Philippines and invited all the banks of the city of Zurich to freeze immediately all the accounts, deposits or safes of the persons, companies, or foundations, of Marcos, mentioned in the order. End quoting. The accounts were frozen at the request of the government of the Philippines, and the PCGG has ensured they have remained frozen to this day. Quoting, pp 193-194. This is all a grand scheme, or scam. Blinded Filipinos must keep repeating that Marcos was a thief so that those hundreds of billions of dollars of Marcos money will remain frozen and not be given to them for their use. Consequently, they must constantly borrow money from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, WB, with so much interest so that this country will remain a slave and shackled to the foreign powers. The Maharlika, the richest country in the world today. The original 720,000 metric tons of gold left by the Filipinos' benevolent forefather, Luzang Tajin, Maharaja of the Maharlika, is mind-boggling. From this, the 640,000 metric tons that was brought to the Vatican in 1939 and back to the vault of the Central Bank of the Maharlika, 617,500 metric tons, on January 7, 1949 could have made the Maharlika a first world country. The Marcos-Diaz alliance deposited their earned 192,000 metric tons of gold in one Swiss bank and not stashed away in 54 countries, as some individuals in government want the people to believe. There is, however, evidence to indicate that the ABL packages were delivered out to many countries. Some of these countries appear to have activated their gold holdings. For instance, look at Dubai and the tremendous construction boom occurring in that nation. From whence came the great wealth to do this? From that, the daily interest earned for this country should be more than enough so that Filipinos need not borrow from the oppressive IMF and WB or leave their families and go abroad to earn dollars. History will show that the money was not stashed away and inaccessible but available to truly deserving Filipinos. There was nothing secret about the Marcos accounts. These accounts were only made secret by some people in the government so that the public would not know its real story. But, nowadays, some of them are secretly trying to withdraw from the Marcos accounts for themselves. However, each time they attempt to do this abroad they end up in jail. Here is another mind-boggling food for thought. In 15 Japanese banks alone, the Marcos-Diaz consortium deposited 44,000, part of the remaining 720,000, metric tons of gold, also minted RPCB, and made liquid to a total of $518,559,000,000 US dollars, $518.6 billion, between 1962 to 1974, earning an average of 1.5% non-compounded interest per year. There are more tons of gold in other banks around the world. Gold can only be made liquid by liquidating it, and we are not sure this was done, not even with 44,000 metric tons, because there is no evidence of that kind of money ever being made available to the Philippines, which has a total money supply of just around $30 billion today. Gold for gold, dollar for dollar, this country, the Maharlika, is the richest country in the world. During a talk show in a US TV the week following the bombing of the New York Twin Towers, President Bush was asked this question: which is the richest country in the world today? With a smile he said, the Philippines. Marcos knew it, but he could not talk. The 30-year period, starting 1946, for the gold claims of the claimants of World War II loot, as determined by the International Court of Justice in Hague, was extended by 10 more years. That was to be the year 1986. At that time they made sure that Marcos would no longer talk. After kidnapping him from Malacanang, they put him in a golden prison in Hawaii. So much about the Sarsala of the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution. The Roman Catholic Archbishop, his priests, the seminarians, his nuns, and his blinded followers who just pray, pay and obey. These traitors on the Filipino people did a good job in favor of those two foreign almighty powers. Demolition campaign against the Filipino people. The invisible and long arm of the foreign powers are now exposed and brought to light so that everyone will see the real, greater, and hidden manipulators and authors of the miseries of this country today. On February 28, 1986, 2 days after K.O.R.A.N was sworn as president but before the proclamation of her revolutionary government through Proclamation No. 3 on March 25, 1986, K.O.R.A.N created the Presidential Commission on Good Government, PCGG, through her Executive Order No. 1. Section 2 says, the Commission shall be charged with the task of assisting the President in regard to the following matters: A. The recovery of all ill-gotten wealth accumulated by the former President Ferdinand E. Marcos, his immediate family, relatives. B. The investigation of such cases of graft and corruption. So far, the PCGG had succeeded in sequestering 88 billion, P88,000,000,000,000 pesos, allegedly the ill-gotten wealth of Marcos. Unfortunately for the PCGG, the gold of Marcos has, so far, eluded it. End quoting. President Ferdinand E. Marcos had a wonderful vision in mind for his people and for the people of the world, as can be presumed from his efforts to implement the ABL program mentioned above. But he had some problems. Marcos could not announce possession of the gold plundered by the Germans and the Japanese during World War II until sometime after 1986 because of the ruling of the International Criminal Court in 1976. That gold was off limits even until the day he was removed from Malacanang by a U.S. helicopter. The existence of the ABL program provides solid evidence of his intention to redistribute, at least some, initially, of the plundered gold for the benefit of many other nations, but he was compelled to work outside of the existing world banking system, and he took on a partner, the supposedly freedom-loving United States. The money masters could hardly approve of such plans because they ran contrary to the wicked agenda of enslaving mankind with fiat, non-value-based currency. Under the fiat money scheme, the international banking cartel have complete control of the world's monetary system, along with freedom to plunder the resources of any nation at will through control of the value of that nation's currency. Perhaps the greatest problem Marcos faced was that the people themselves were not yet ready. They did not know the issues because for the most part it was not wise at that time for him to tell them. By 1986 conditions in the Philippines were not that bad, the national debt was small and manageable, the economy was growing, the people were productive, wealth was more evenly distributed then than it is now. It was not heavenly because the country was still subject to the chokehold of the international banking cartel, but it has only gotten worse since. Today the people are ready, made so by the experience of the intervening 20 years as administration after administration has operated under IMF/WB constraints and conditionalities. Today there is the example of Venezuela, Malaysia, China, and others throwing off the yoke of the international bankers to a certain extent, in some cases tying the value of their own currencies to the value of the world reserve currency, the US dollar, to prevent further depredations. Today, the truth can be made known and shouted from the rooftops: the Philippines is the richest country in the world. Today, with the land titling issue in an absolute mess manufactured from the avarice and greed of a few, the protections of OCT 01-4 can be invoked. And today, Global Alliance Investment Association stands ready, willing, and able to assist with the provision of banking collateral as necessary to stabilize the situation and ensure the best outcome. How soon will the promise of the Golden Age materialize? Just as soon as perceptions change to a sufficient extent. Accordingly, anything you can do to spread this factual information far and wide throughout the Philippines and the rest of the world brings that day closer to reality. Ron.